would hope that I'm a better leader than I was 20 years ago. And that's just through the depth of knowledge, whether it's talking to people like you, Sam, whether it's listening to podcasts, whether it's reading books. It should add to your knowledge. You know, I always read about people like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, the volume of stuff that they read, I just find mind-blowing.
Before we jump into the conversation, I just want to say what absolute joy it was for me to spend time with and speak with Darryl. He is, for me, an extraordinary leader, and he demonstrates the kind of leadership that I think we need more of in business and indeed in the world today. For those of you who don't know, Darryl is the founder of Gunnercooke LLP, and when he founded the business, it really represented a disruption to the old model of the large law firm. And he did that in order to be able to recalibrate the business towards truly having positive impact and being able to do good works ultimately in society. And you'll hear and you'll see in the conversation that he's been extraordinarily successful in doing that. I learned so much in this conversation, I truly did, and I was genuinely so inspired. It really was a pleasure. And I hope you'll have something like a similar experience in listening to this conversation too. Yeah, I've just hit record, Darryl, because I figure you might say something. You might say something brilliant that I want to capture.
You missed that. I'll have to repeat that. I was just saying that, but I think you have to enjoy absolutely everything. I think leaders and business leaders and all sorts of people just focus too much on hitting targets and over bureaucratizing things, and I think you've got to learn to enjoy it, because if you enjoy it and you relax, you will hit those targets. There was a quote by Jack Welch, I remember years ago, who said, I used to focus on the numbers. He said, it was only when I focused on the behaviors did I realize how good the numbers could become. And I think that's absolutely right, is focusing on the behaviors and the pleasure and the enjoyment.
I love that, Darryl. And I love that idea that if you relax, things will start to work out much better. That's a big part of what I'm doing when I'm working with chiefs, actually. I mean, I wasn't planning to go into this, but I think you just raised you put it so elegantly, which is these guys have so much coming at them and so much responsibility. And they tend to be high achievers, they're performance-oriented people, which is kind of why they are where they are. But that can lead to just an increase in unhelpful behaviors, because they become kind of tense in that pursuit of performance. And when they can start to relax and know that they're going to be okay whatever happens here, they then start to, elevate's the word I use, but you know what I mean? They just start to be able to see things more clearly and respond more effectively.
I think that's 100% right. And we have to learn how we work with leaders, I think, because the best part about leaders is the time they take away from the business. A good friend of mine used to talk about kicking leaves, just going away and kicking leaves and thinking about the business. And that time is really valuable, and it's considered time. But if you get back into an organization that's going at 100 miles an hour and forcing you to make decisions quickly and push things forwards at a pace that isn't really desired or doesn't really need to be, I think you need to have your goals. You need to steadily move towards them. But I think you just need that time out to be considered and think about where the business is heading and is this the right thing for it? And sometimes we just go a little bit too quick, I think. Anyway, perhaps that's just me. Perhaps that's my lack of ability and I have to go at a slow pace. I don't know.
No, I think it's such an important unlock, really, isn't it? And my point of view is, what are the results? And my observation working with folks is that when they apply that kind of mindset, the results tend to be better. It's not fluffy. It's not an indication of underperformance. It's actually just what works best. And often that ability to step out and step above. I love what you said, because there's some podcasts I'd give a shout out to, actually, and I'll certainly do it in the show notes. But I was listening to some of the other interviews you've done, Darryl, and you talk about leadership is a lot about thinking. And to me, that speaks to that need to be able to have time to think, to step out of the constant contact of business and be able to think.
Yeah, I mean, I think if one person has to think in the organization, it's the person at the top, hasn't it? So they're
Mm.
getting, as you say, so much coming at them. They have to step away and thinking. And there was that great quote. Who what was it? Henry Thoreau, I think, who said, "Simplify, simplify, simplify." And that's what a leader has to do, because there's so much coming at them from so many different directions. As the business gets bigger, it gets, that happens more and more. So they've got to have that ability of stepping outside the business, and
Mm.
simplifying the business and then coming back in and giving their views and their direction after they've done that.
I love that, Darryl. We're straight into leadership insights, and I definitely want to get more of those. And you know what, I was just like I said, I was doing a little bit of research, and a lot of this I knew already, but I was just struck, Darryl, by wow, this is a guy who's accomplished so much, and I say that very just as an observation, and not to flatter. And I was almost a little intimidated, like, oh gosh, you know, where do we start, and how do we kind of capture all that you've done to date? But actually, what I'd like to do, if it's all right with you, is I'd like to just start with actually the beginning for you, and just kind of talk a little bit about where life started out for you. Like, what were you born into, and what did the world look like when you arrived?
Okay. Happy to do that. You're very flattering because I definitely don't see myself like that. So it is very, very flattering for you to say those things. And it was an incredibly an ordinary start. I had two very hardworking parents. I wasn't born with a silver spoon. They were they were very hardworking, and I think that always came through. And I think they. My father had been was just a toolmaker, but was also quite a successful sportsman and had been a very successful professional and amateur sportsman. And, so I guess he had a certain drive and competitive spirit. But my mother was probably the person with a more of a competitive spirit. And I do remember her phrase, which was constantly through my childhood, as the world is your oyster.
Wow.
But and I think she used to say that a lot. But I was from a northern town. I didn't see a lot of what she meant by that, but it was always in my head that actually you can do what you want. I mean, it just kind of formed my thinking from a very early age. I didn't, people talk about, and I certainly have had imposter syndrome at various stages, as everyone has, but it just wasn't a big part of my life because I just thought, well, actually, that's fine. If I want to do, I can achieve it. I'll do it another way. So I think that was really important. Having a mother who kind of did drum that into me.
Were
Um,
there siblings as well?
no, there was just me, and that may be another factor. I don't know. There's this great data around on these things,
Yeah.
isn't there? I don't. It is interesting. I did look once because I think I probably had this kind of view as if you're an only child, you're spoiled type of thing. You have this special treatment. And I did look into that, and I think it came from, I can't remember the name of it. It was from one survey that was done, and everyone kind of followed on that survey. I don't think there was anything particular about that. I don't feel as though I was spoiled anyway.
No.
But there was disciplines where I certainly had to make my bed before I left the house, and I
Mm.
certainly had to do certain things. They both had quite high standards, even though they'd not massively achieved, I suspect. They'd not been to university or anything like that, but they did have high standards, and those were instilled in me from a very early age. I don't know,
Yeah.
from, I can't remember. I always had to make my bed, and it had to
Yeah.
look, a certain way.
Yeah.
So I suspect that was part of my brain. And then I was very lucky. I went to I got a scholarship to a grammar school. I wasn't
What what
particularly
what what
academic
town
person.
What town did you grow up in? You said a northern
Oldham.
town.
I
Oldham.
was brought
Yeah.
up in Oldham. I went to the grammar school there, Hume Grammar School. I wasn't particularly academic. I was very sporting focused, and I loved sport. Football, in particular, um, was the thing that really turned me on.
And
But I also
you said your father had been a sportsman as well. So what was his connection to sport?
he'd been a sportsman. I think he'd done a number of different sports, but his main sport later on he became professional in for a year or two in rugby league. But it was at a time when if you got injuries, there was very little insurance, and he got quite a bad injury very early on and had to drop out of that and find work. But it was definitely a sporting environment.
And just thinking about that environment. So you're brought up in an environment where there's a clear value in hard work, and there's also a clear value in having some self-discipline and personal responsibility and that kind of thing. You said that you thought maybe your parents, like was it something like they didn't fulfill all that they wanted to fulfill, or they're like, was there a lot on you to kind of, hey, the world's your oyster, there's so much you can do? I don't know, I get this picture of there are these very devoted parents kind of wanting to see you fly, and maybe in a way that they hadn't flown, or not.
I don't think they ever felt like that. I think my mother came from a very large family, my father not so large. I think they were very happy. They kind of, a very, I hate to call classes, but what would they be? They'd be lower middle classes. They were very content in that. They got the holidays every year. They got nice clothes. They worked hard to have the extra little things that you would have in a town like Oldham. And they weren't looking around and saying they'd missed out on things. But yes, I suppose when I came along, they were very excited about things that I achieved. And that would make them very proud. So I was incredibly fortunate, I think, in having parents like that.
And your dad was a toolmaker. So what specifically?
He worked in the airline industry in particular, and he was a toolmaker in that industry with a number of different jobs. And I suppose that is another thing. I do remember he did all the work around the house. Great handyman. His precision. To be a toolmaker, you have to be very precise in your work. Yeah. And I think when he did work around the house, it was done to the very, very highly standard. And he just didn't know another way. And I guess that probably came into my sight, that if you're going to do something, do it well or not at all. And that probably came from him, I suspect.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that very kind of detail-oriented type trait. Something like that.
Yeah.
So that's so interesting, Darryl. And then did you say you got a scholarship into the grammar school? Sorry.
I got a scholarship to grammar school because, to be honest, I'm not sure I would have got there otherwise. They may have done, I don't know. But certainly getting a scholarship there was a big thing.
And was that a sporting scholarship or an academic scholarship? Or both?
No, it was an academic. It was an academic. Yeah. It was an academic scholarship. Yeah.
And then you were saying, yeah, go on.
I was going to say, I have to say, I wouldn't ever say I was a particularly academic person. When I put my mind to something that I wanted to do, I could be academic, but I wasn't an academic person by nature. Yeah.
And so then what was school life like for you? Was that a happy experience?
Loved it. Best, was it the best time of my life? I'd like to think there's been lots of times like that, but it was a great time. It was very, very enjoyable. And I think when you play sport and you captain the football teams and things like that, it kind of does help, I suspect.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, being captain of the football team, being sporty, that physical capability and presence, that counts for a lot, doesn't it? Especially when you're growing up as a boy. It's a big deal.
Yeah. I think that's right. you're just living in the moment, aren't you? So
Yeah. Is that it? Are you still in contact with guys you went to school with? Is that?
there's a few, very small group, but in particular, my very closest friend, we met at the age of 11, I think. So it was the first year at the grammar school when we met. I mean, it was. I'm not particularly proud of this story, but I'd actually just broken the headmaster's window with a football, and I'd hid round the corner, and he came along, and I whispered to him to pick the ball up, and as he did so, the headmaster popped his head out the window, and he was dragged in to see the headmaster. It's not a story I'm particularly proud of, but it is how we met. And
did he not grass you up? Did he not grass you up?
No, he didn't, which I suspect is a real good test of his loyalty. I think he had to stay there. Actually, what is really bad is I didn't go in and own up. So that's probably bad.
and a friendship was formed.
And a friendship was formed, yeah. We've been closest friends since then.
So then what happened next? School was happy, and then what happened? What's the next step?
I think it was those days, Sam, where I played football, representative football, etc. And I'd love to have been a footballer, but it wasn't it wasn't what it is now. And I remember my father used to say, "Well, if you do this, you'll end up with a fish and chip shop at the end of your career, or a sports shop or something." And is that where you want to be? So I knew it was never going to be my career. So I guess around the age of 14 or 15, I began to think quite early on what I'd want to do. And I didn't really have anyone who I knew who was in the law. But I suppose I'd watched television programs, and I began quite early on to think that I would quite like to be a lawyer. It was really at the time about being, defending people, a human rights lawyer, that sort of thing. That was what was driving me, and I thought it would be cool to be a lawyer, but I didn't really have much to base it on.
And that was as young as 14, 15, having those thoughts?
I think so, yes. I do think I kind of had in my head that that's what I was going to do from that age. Yeah.
Wow. And so what did that then lead you to? What decisions were you therefore making, if you had that thought in your mind?
I don't know how much I took in what was on offer. I kind of thought it would just happen. Wasn't incredibly thoughtful about it. Didn't work particularly hard. And in the end, I think it was a very good history result that got me into university. So I did an S level, I think, and came quite high up in the country. And I do remember at the time I'd chosen to go to Leeds University because I wanted to go and play football at Leeds. But my headmaster, through a contact of his at Balliol at Oxford, had asked me to, because of my exam result in history, to go down and consider going to Oxford. And it is, in hindsight, I look back, Sam, and I didn't do it because I wanted to do law, and I thought I wanted to go and play football there, and I didn't think Oxford, I could do those. I didn't realise you could do law, or you could do history and then convert to become a lawyer afterwards, which clearly you can. I just didn't have that knowledge, and I didn't ask the questions. So they were trying to get me to do history, and I just thought, no, I want to be a lawyer.
Well, I'm just thinking, we're talking about the only child syndrome, whatever that might be. But to me, there's something in my observation of friends who are only children, and this is obviously a massive sweeping generalization, but there's something about a strong sense of self-determination. Like there's a self-assurance around, well, if I've decided on something, then that's probably the right way to do it. There's something about that self-certainty, I think, that can be quite a common trait. And that, of course, that's not exclusive, but yeah.
Yeah, it could have been, because I clearly turned down, what, when in hindsight, I look back and thought was a fantastic opportunity. But I was extremely determined. I was going to be a lawyer, and
Yeah.
going to do history at Oxford just didn't seem to fit in with that at the time.
No. So then, did you play footy at Leeds then?
Yeah, I played mainly for the university team. There, I think I captained the team for 2 years, which I think was unusual. But I played outside, actually at Leeds, and then at semi-professional club out there for a while as well. And so it was still a big. So even at university, it was still a big part of what I was doing, football.
And
But
interesting.
there was no thought of ever becoming professional. Just wasn't the time. To be a lawyer would have been as a far. Now I think it's far preferable to become a Premiership professional footballer than it is a lawyer. But at the time, it just didn't enter my head.
Interesting that there's a through line of captaincy. So you're captaining.
Yeah, it's true. It's very true.
And actually, I mean, I'm jumping ahead, but one of the things that I observe in your story, if you like, and maybe part of one of the aspects of your success is that seeming quite natural ability to bring people with you. So that's interesting to me, that even very early on, there was a kind of, hey, this is the right guy to put, like, people will follow this guy or something like that.
Yeah, I think it happened, Sam. I don't think it was deliberate, but I think you're right. I fell into, when I went into places, I would quite often become the captain very early on. And I think I think one thing that was really interesting is I always loved to do things differently. And I do remember I had to stand and be voted to become captain. So at the end of my first year, I was playing football for the university first team my first year. And then I stood to be captain, and you had to give a speech, and people voted for you. And I told them, I remember, I don't know where I got this idea from, that I would take the university first team on the Wednesday afternoons to go and play football at professional clubs, or I would get professional clubs to come and play at the university, which was great. Of course, I absolutely stole it. Of course, everybody wanted that, So, and I did. I remember that first year I invited Manchester United in, Leeds United, Sheffield Wednesday, Barnsley, and they came and played football against us midweek as part of their training programs. But I think, it's interesting something you said that, because I do remember later when I started the business, someone said to me, "You can either be the best or be different." And he said, on day one, it's very hard to be different. Very hard to be the best. So you have to be different. And I think that had always been in my psyche of when I was leading in sport, that I'd always tried to do things a bit differently than was done.
Well, yeah, and there are so many parallels I could start to draw, actually, just between that incident and that strategy, if you like, and then perhaps how you launched Gunnercooke, and that ability to, first of all, understand what the opportunity is for the people you're wanting to buy in, like understanding how the world looks to them and going, well, wouldn't this be great if you could all get to do this? And interesting that no one else was seeing that, but you could see it.
No.
And then the ability to
articulate. I did love that. I remember we were, we did quite well in competitions. We got quite far in the English university competitions. And I remember, going to see people who had picked the team, and then going around to see them all the night before to talk to them all individually. And then I remember preparing what I was going to say before the match. And yeah, it was a really big thing. But I really did enjoy. Really did enjoy that. I enjoyed seeing people do well, and feeling that I'd been helping in them achieving that.
Yeah, my goodness, and you could almost be talking, I expect, about your experience with many of your business ventures as well. It's a similar kind of thing, isn't it? Of this could make your life better, and here's how we're going to do it.
Yeah, and I much prefer teams. I'm not
Yeah.
a, I'm not a loner in that regard. I can very happy spending time on my own, but I do much prefer being part of a team. I do
Mm.
enjoy being part of a team.
Yeah, interesting. And and that you kind of understood that about yourself quite early on as well, by the sound of it.
Yes, I suspect I'd just always played team sports, perhaps, and I've
Yeah.
just always enjoyed it. And then I'd got to the point, yeah, yeah. No, I think I just enjoyed being part of teams. So I did do athletics. Actually, I did athletics for quite a while, but it wasn't the same thing. It didn't have the same pull as playing football.
Yeah. And then after uni, was it straight into the world of work, or what happened then?
It's really interesting actually because I kind of knew I wanted to be a lawyer. After that, I hadn't got the foggiest what I wanted to do. And there are so many, as you know, different types of lawyers. And I'd kind of developed a little bit of a social conscience, I think, when I was just pre-university. I was working with one or two charities, and then at university I was as well. And I had this idea that I really wanted to help and to serve, and how I would do that. But becoming a lawyer, I just didn't know. Just had no idea, and I kind of thought, as time developed, I thought, well, it doesn't matter. And I should try all the different. I thought I was young. I should try the different areas of law and see which I did enjoy, which is ultimately what I did. So I started off by going to the bar as a barrister, and uh, I kind of I wasn't the natural speaker. I wasn't. Um, uh, I probably didn't have that sort of confidence that probably a barrister needs to have, but I did develop it because I did realise it was important. So I remember when I was at university, I entered into a speaking competition where you had to give a talk, and I went into it was a big thing in the faculty. And I put my name down just because I thought I had to do it. It was something I had to do. And I went and I was absolutely awful. I mean, I was absolutely terrible. And I remember didn't get anywhere. There was like two or three professors voting and a big audience. And I came out and because I played football, I was lucky enough to have a car and a bit of money playing professional football. I jumped in the car and drove home. I was just so embarrassed.
Yeah.
But I came back and thought, actually, I need to do something about that. And I started to work on how do I talk to people? How do I talk to
Mm.
audiences? And then I went to become a barrister at the Inns of Court in London. And there was a big competition that you had to go in, that was run at the Old Bailey that you had to have to do to be a barrister. And I went into it and I won. And I was kind of blown away. I just learned how to tell stories, I think. And it changed me. It gave me such a lot of confidence that actually I could change from being terrible to being quite good at something.
How were you doing that? What were you? You said I've got to do something about this. How did you set about doing something about it?
I think it's always been. I kind of remember one of the things I do remember was in a just the due diligence and the research and the reading and things like that you had to. I remember doing geography once at something, and I'd done a piece of work and I got a very good mark for it. And I realised actually I'd just gone away and done what the others should have done, which had read around and come up with different ideas and put it into my work. And I think throughout my life I've always done that. If there's something there, I know you just have to learn how to do it, and that can mean who was it who said? I think it was Churchill, wasn't it? Something like what was it? Education, I can't remember the quote now, but education kind of starts when you leave school. It doesn't,
Yeah.
and it just continues. It just continues, and yeah. So I've always looked and said, well, there's a book there that nowadays there's a podcast, or there's this, or there's
Yeah.
that. Just have to listen to them, and then learn how to make my own views.
Mm. Yeah. I think Churchill said something also about my parents didn't know much when I was 16, but they'd learned an awful lot by the time I was 25 or something.
25. Yeah. I think that was Mark Twain, actually, Sam. We'll have a big debate on that.
Was it?
I actually think that was Mark Twain, actually. I'll check afterwards.
If in doubt, attribute it to Churchill. That's the general.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
And actually, you mentioned that desire to help and serve, and that was something that was, to me, that seems like something that's quite baked in to your DNA. And because you kind of referenced it also, even when you're having those early thoughts about the law, age 14, 15. I mean, does that, if you just reflect on that now, looking back, can you kind of, do you see that as something that was sort of in your psyche very early on, maybe even going back before teenage years, that.
Yeah, I think I remember playing football and being asked by the coach to help out a team that was a team largely of autistic children, and I used to go and train them, and I remember getting such pleasure out of it because they had such pleasure. They'd miss the ball, and not just one of them would fall and roll on the floor; they'd all roll on the floor because they'd missed the ball, and I remember it's just amazing, and that kind of built. And then I went to university and joined a few charities and did, and it was the very closeness. It was the it's the intimacy of helping people and seeing how that went. I suppose now I try to do it in a Wigan way, but I feel as though now I have a bigger influence, and I'm more involved at a higher level than I am at that kind of individual level. But that individual level was, it was great. I loved it.
Yeah, beautiful.
And I think, it is interesting, Sam. I genuinely think we talk so much, without going off on one here, but we talk so much about happiness. Is it the Dalai Lama said, we don't know the meaning of life, but we do know the purpose, and that's to be happy. And then we talk so much out of it, and we kind of look at it and say, well, when I'm married, or when I have a baby, or when I get a promotion, I'll be happy, and we're striving for it. And the reality, I think, is happiness has to be absolutely in the moment that you're living. This moment has to be your happiest moment. And when you're looking and helping others, I think you can feel that really quickly, that real pleasure of trying to help someone else, or whatever it is, just having a chat in a supermarket to somebody, whatever it is, just bringing that pleasure to them. And it brings immense happiness to us. So, it's kind of, in some ways, it's great, but in some ways it's quite selfish. It's kind of brings happiness to me to do that.
So beautifully articulated, Darryl. And to me, that's such an important awakening that really there is nowhere to get to. I mean, meaning is right here and right now. And if it's not right here and right now, you're never going to find it. It's not somewhere in the future. And we all tend to be so conditioned, don't we, to be in pursuit of the thing that is going to give us the fulfillment. But fulfillment has to occur here and now. It's the only place it can occur.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And you've just got to look at the moment you're living now and tell yourself, this is my happiest moment. And really, don't overbuild your expectations, just live in the moment.
I like that. And they don't overbuild your expectations. An interesting one too, because I think it's so easy, and even in this kind of engagement where, I'm talking to someone who's accomplished a ton and probably way more than the vast majority of people will. And then it's kind of easy in some ways, I think, to get the wrong message that it was always about that accomplishment. But what I'm hearing you say is, well, that wasn't really necessarily where my heart was at. It was more in what's joyful for me, what's fulfilling for me right here and now, in a very purposeful way, and that perhaps, I'm not hearing you describe a young man who is saying, I must go and accomplish great things. I'm sort of hearing you describe a young man who's very, very purposeful, very intentional, but it's more like, what's meaningful to me here and now? what's is that? Does that make sense?
I think that's right. I suppose I have to balance it that I was very ambitious. I don't
Okay.
think that's wrong that I wasn't ambitious. That I did enjoy succeeding and challenging myself and things like
Mm.
that. But I think I was careful to think, well, I just have to. I will do much better if I enjoy it. And I think that was
Mm.
the reason why I didn't know what sort of lawyer I wanted to be. So I started off at the bar. I worked out that that was quite enjoyable, but I didn't like working on my own the whole time. I didn't like just going into court, coming out,
Mm.
going into the library, going back to my chambers. And I quite like being with people, I think. So I then moved into industry. And that taught me so much. I joined what was a company, it was like the fourth largest company in the world. A company, it's been dissolved. It's a German company called Hearst. And that taught me such a lot because I realized I liked being in meetings. I was very lucky, very young, but as a company secretary, I'd be on the board of quite a few of the quite large companies, Rochard Perfumes and companies like that. And I used to listen to these 50-year-old, very, very intelligent people sitting around chatting. And I loved being part of that and learning from that.
Mm.
So, I changed from setting off to be a barrister to thinking, no, this is where I want to be. I want to be in meetings. I want to be in business. Um, but I think then I'd been put on businesses. Large businesses are very good at this. I think our government could learn from this. But large businesses are very good at training people from a very young age to become leaders. And I was put on
Mm.
programs to develop me as a leader. The whole idea I'd become a CEO of a country or a business at some point. But I then decided, well, actually, I'm not sure I want to do that. I still felt I wanted to be a lawyer, and I'd just never been a solicitor at that stage. So I thought, well, perhaps I better go and do that before I make a decision. So I then went off back into London, back into the city, and set myself up as a solicitor, and fell into at the time private equity, which was a growing part, and it satisfied such a lot of things because as being a lawyer, but I was focusing on business part of law, and I was in
Yeah.
meetings, and I really enjoyed that. But what it lost for me was I certainly wasn't then doing what I'd set out to do, which was helping people and serving individuals. I was then working in business, and I did find I liked it, but I was just working in business at that
And
point.
what year are we approximately?
Oh, I hate it when people ask me years. So we would be late 80s, late
Okay.
80s.
So late 80s. What was the world of private equity like in the late 80s? Are
It
we
was
barbarians at the gate?
Yeah, it was one of those things. It was when something starts off, particularly as a lawyer say, or in any other, you're quite fortunate if you are within the kind of favored group that understands private equity. So I wrote a book very early on, which is now, I
Mm.
think the eighth edition is out
Hmm.
this year. And it was good because there wasn't a book around. And there weren't many, perhaps half a dozen law firms that were doing private equity. So I was very lucky in being able to develop skills when no one else had those skills.
Mm.
I mean, now it's totally different. It's totally different.
I was just listening to a podcast over the weekend, which was someone who's just written a book about their experience of private equity across sectors. Quite damning, and actually and making the distinction between private equity and VC, but it was quite a damning account of how destructive private equity has been, particularly in the States, especially
Um,
as it relates to some of the kind of things that are so meaningful for you around meaning and culture and people and relationship and making the world a better
well,
place.
it is interesting because I don't think private equity has to be like that.
No.
But you're right. It is often driven by people who are driven by getting bigger and better returns to their funds.
Mm.
I don't know if you know, but we went through the process 3 years ago of deciding what was going to be the succession, how we're going to develop the business. And we looked into listing the company, and I felt that that would really damage the culture if we did that. So we wouldn't be able to do what we wanted to. And our culture is so important to us, so important to us. I wouldn't do this, what I do, if I couldn't focus on our culture as the most important thing. But we also looked at private equity. We were chased quite a lot and still get chased by private equity quite a lot. And I'm a big admirer of private equity. They're very efficient. They're very good at what they do. But once again, I felt that it would damage the culture because they would make a decision that I may not make. And I'd have to go along with it. So we chose not to do that either. And perhaps, as you know, my two sons have come into the business, and Sarah, my co-founder's son, who's based in New York, who was at JP Morgan and left and come into the business. My two boys are PwC and Slaughter and May, and they've come into the business. So they'll take it on. And I feel very, very pleased about that, because the most important thing to me was protecting just what we've created and taking it onto a higher level. And much as I love private equity, I'm not sure they'd be able to do that.
I wanted to talk about the succession piece, and in a way, to me, that was coming at the end of the conversation. But you've raised it, and it was very interesting to me looking at that, because it occurred to me that you have such a different model in Gunnercooke that ordinarily in a large business, in an international large business, maybe any business, but in these large organizations, there's this funnel up to the top, if you like, and then there are the chiefs at the top table. And there's quite a lot of perfectly healthy ambition to get into one of those seats. But it occurred to me that with the model that you've got, that it very much is this servant leadership model. And so the kind of chiefs at the top who are leading the organization, I guess, if you like, around that executive board table, and I may not have this accurate, but this was my kind of assumption. They're really there to serve all of these entrepreneurs in succeeding. And so you don't have that same dynamic of, well, and the reason I was thinking about this was because I thought, well, that could have been interesting, bringing, founders bringing in their kids onto the top table. Obviously, I'm assuming, obviously, like, you wouldn't do that unless you knew that they would be the right people. But there could be a scenario where, founders bring their sons in, and presume this does happen in founder-led businesses, their sons, their daughters, whoever in, and there's some kind of anxiety within the organization about, well, hold on, have they earned their stripes? And well, I thought I was going to get that, that role, or what about my succession plan? But I imagine that a lot of that probably doesn't exist, because you're there actually to serve all of these lawyers who are operating their own businesses in many, many respects, and you're there to serve them. So it just makes so much sense. Like, yeah, well, bringing in family is a great way to protect that. And maybe I'm not being very articulate, Darryl, but am I speaking to something that resonates with you there at all?
No, definitely, I would say, because I was in very, 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 very large global law firms, and the people who provided the administrative support in those law firms were known as the general office or the admin or whatever it was, and they didn't. So when we started, I set it up very carefully from day one to give all those people we would need their own identity, and we call them GC Trust. We deliberately put trust in the name. Mm-hmm. So their role is, as you say, absolutely, and they're taught from the day they join, is to serve the partners and the lawyers as we grow the business. So the partners and lawyers grow their businesses, and the job of GC Trust is to give as much service as they can to do that. It doesn't mean they get everything that they want, because you can't grow a business. You have to say no lots of times, but there's a way of saying no. and therefore there is a culture around GC Trust of service, and that comes right through then to the leadership team who kind of manage GC Trust. So yeah, it's a really, really important part of the business. You know, I always the power of the business is our culture. It is really interesting. I kind of think that people join us for three reasons, but predominantly they'll join us for personal ambition. People join us because I always say to them, you don't want to get to the end of your life and wish you designed it differently. So take control of it. And but then we also say you're not a lawyer anymore, you're a lawyer and a business person. So we have to give them the skills, the support to help them to grow a business. That can be coaching, it can be lots of different things within the business. But we want them to be successful, we want them to be happy and enjoy what they do. And so GC Trust is set up in a way to serve them. There's a big partner services part of GC Trust, talking to lawyers all the time. What can we do? How can we help? Where do you need support, etc.? And that is a key part. And then the other two reasons why they would join, well, probably not as much, but they might find out later. We do have a really strong sense of values, where compassion is at the heart of it. We use the phrase compassionomics, where we always say it is really about compassion and serving and support, but we do it because it's good for all of us. We don't do it just because we want to make money. It's just good for all of us to do it. And then the third thing is we do have this really solid foundation now where we are really trying, and I think we're just starting in this area, but we're starting to really impact society. And we think that we can impact different areas if we really focus on them and get them right, and get as many people in the business engaged in that as possible. So I think those three things drive the firm. GC Trust are really the ones that hold it all together.
There's so much there, Darryl. Gosh. So picking up on that personal ambition, like that's one of the reasons people come into the business. And we can talk more about, well, what is this model of the business? But people are coming in for personal ambition. And it occurs to me that in a more traditional corporate structure, part of that personal ambition would be, well, I'm going to climb up to the next rung on the ladder. But because your model is really about people running their own businesses within the partnership, and maybe I'm oversimplifying, that personal ambition is much more about how do I grow my business, you know, in the ways that are meaningful and purposeful for me. So it's in a way, it's still about personal ambition, but it's a slightly different expression of that ambition, isn't it?
I think that's absolutely right. So we never set targets for people. We don't set any targets, no hourly targets, no client targets, anything like that. We don't have business plans when people come in, but we do have what we call a process called a vision traction organizer, where we look at people and help them to really think about their lives. And actually, the first thing on the first page is, what are your values? You know, what is it that your values are? Because we want you to live your values, and to do that in an organization that you join. And what is your passion? So we want them to see what their passion is. And then we look at, well, where would you like to be in 10 years and 3 years? And we go into various different things. But we then give them a coach. So they get a coach before they join us, not after they join us. They get a coach before they join us. And we're thinking about, what do you want your life to look like? You know, and we like to get them to involve their children, their families in thinking about that. I mean, I had one partner who came to me, I always remember, there's a lot of stories like this, but I just think this is a beautiful story. And this is a few years ago now, but he said, I want to pick my daughter up. She's just started school, and I want to pick her up every Thursday afternoon at 3:00 and take her for afternoon tea. And I said, great, do it. So he did. And I saw him perhaps a year ago, and I asked him how it was going. He said, yeah, I still pick her up on Thursdays and we go for afternoon tea. And I think she was about 14 at this time. You know, so that to me encapsulates it. We're just trying to find what makes people happy and how they do it. The reality is, when you do this, 95% earn more than they did previously. They absolutely earn more than they previously. The other 5%, I have no idea what they're doing, Sam. They're probably just laying a beat somewhere because you must earn more. I'm sure you will, but that's not the driver. That's not the driver.
So there's, in what you've just described, I mean, to me, and most people I suspect who listen to this will have an understanding of this already, but in case they don't, what you've just described is so completely different and disruptive to what would be the kind of paradigm and the onboarding experience of a partner into a large, your kind of classic large law firm. And in a way, I feel like you've just described the kind of central point and DNA of the disruption that you were seeking that motivated you really to launch Gunnercooke. So I'm gonna wind the clock back a little bit because I want to get into that, because to me that's very like it, and maybe the world's moved on a fair amount since you founded, so it may not seem quite as disruptive as it was then, although I still suspect it is still very disruptive. So just rewinding a bit to when you were having these other experiences in your career, and you had gone back, you were being a lawyer within private equity, and you were sort of discovering about business, but you were also still very drawn into law. And were you also creating other businesses at the same time? Is that right? Did you also?
I think it was I suspect going into industry at an early stage created my passion for business. And I did have that. I actually, I was moving between one large law firm to another, and I bought my local pub, and I had great fun. It was great fun. Wasn't incredibly well. It was quite successful for a time, but it was a victim of its own success, I think. But it was great. It was great fun. Taught me lots of things, and I enjoyed that. And I'd always had an eye for doing. I'd set up a conference company and a few other things. So yes, outside the law, I was still doing quite a lot of things in business that I enjoyed. But yeah,
But that I do find quite remarkable, because you're in a career that's demanding, and that you were able to have the capacity to, you just kind of mentioned it there as kind of these throwaway comments. Yeah, I bought a pub and that was successful in whatever, and then I also started this conference company and something else. It's like, well, hold on, you're just describing full-time jobs everywhere. So, how did you manage to have that kind of capacity, do you think? Because it sort of seems like it was quite, the way you relate to it, it seems like, it was pretty easy.
I suppose when I do anything, you're at the thing that you said at the beginning. I don't do it on my own, Sam. I work out how to do it. There's things I'm doing now which I'm working out very early stages. How do I involve people who would be of interest in that? And we do it together. So I kind of devise the vision and the passion for it. And I think probably I'm quite good at, I think I'm one of these people that will sit on a motorway, Sam, and will be very frustrated at being sat in a traffic jam for 2 miles and be working out how the highways agency could operate differently to get a better result. I think it's just my nature to be looking at how can we improve this? How can we make things better? And then when I've done that and come up with an idea that I think might work, then I have to bring people with me. So then it's about, getting support for people who believe in the same thing. And then we can achieve. I couldn't do any of these things on my own.
Well, that bringing people with you is so key, isn't it? I know we've already touched on it, but it occurs to me that one of the things that people are challenged with in leadership as they do ascend into the top tier of leadership is that and this might be very true for lawyers as well, is that they tend to have got there because they're technically very brilliant in a particular lane. they've got real expertise, and part of that is their ability to do it. And actually, what they're then being asked to do is in some ways let go of that and become someone who's actually bringing people with them, who's influencing other people, who's inspiring other people, who's empowering other people. And that's quite a different skill, isn't it? That's quite a different capability. And sometimes that, I think that can take a minute for leaders to figure out, right? It sounds like you always kind of had that capability built in.
Yeah, it probably goes back to my football days and things like that, doesn't it? Really, always, and I just have that immense pleasure of. I mean, it's not. It is not. I just really do have immense pleasure in seeing other people come on and do well and succeed and doing it together. And I think, as I said, more enjoyable being a footballer than being, an athlete. So yeah, I just enjoy working with people. But you can't, you have to pick and choose the people that you work with. But yeah, I find that's so. I mean, I think my business is just, we do this talk, don't we talk a lot about, and I think it's going away now, about work-life balance, and I never quite understood it, and I wanted to do. I always used to think, yes, that's got to be right. I knock off at 5:30 and that's it. But actually, I think it's just kind of all integrated. I do it. Whatever time it is, I'll enjoy it. And whether I'm spending time with the family or spending time on business, it's just a passion. It's what I enjoy.
And so, what was the moment of inception for Gunnercooke? Like, what was you? You obviously had lots of irons and lots of fires in some ways already, and plenty of options available to you. So, what drove you to take on the challenge of creating a whole new business?
I think there was a frustration developing over many, many years. And I think it was a frustration of leadership, Sam, actually. And if you think about a law firm, we get most of our ideas not from law firms. We have metrics where we follow other businesses, and we tend not to follow law firms, because I think generally what happens, someone's there who's a lawyer for 20 years, 25 years or something. Friday evening they're a lawyer, and then Monday morning they're running the business, and they have not really had any skills. They'll have some natural skills, but they haven't had any skills in training them. As I said, when I was in industry, they trained you from a very early stage. So I think I always had. Yeah, and I always used to say, if I'm running a team and I'm a 2 out of 10 as a leader, I have to report to a 3 out of 10, or else I'm just frustrated. If I reported to a 1 out of 10, then I'm just going to get frustrated. And I was on the board of a top 10 or so UK law firm. And I remember the whole purpose, the whole role of a managing partner in a traditional law firm is profits per partner. That's the only metric that's important. And the American lawyer in 1985 started to publish profits per partner. And I think it's kind of almost obscene. So the profits per partner means how much the partner is going to earn.
Sure.
And I never liked it. I always thought it was wrong, but it was the measure by which a managing partner was judged, because what it would mean, he could bring more partners in, if the profits per partner are high, he would lose less partners, etc., etc. And I remember being at a board meeting when the managing partner had brought in Deloitte's to give a presentation to the board that basically said, well, if you want to improve profits per partner, then if you lose 20 partners, your profits per partner will go to this. If you lose 40 partners, they'll go to this. You lose 60 partners, they'll go to this. Which do you want to do? And they chose to lose 20 partners. And that was it. That was the decision there and then at the board meeting. And I remember sitting there thinking, but what about winning clients? What about servicing clients? What about our people? We're not having any discussions about those things. It's how to improve our revenue and that. It was just get rid of 20 partners and your profits partners.
And part of another part of that, Darryl, presumably is also the billable minute or even the billable second. So, which is part of that, isn't it? Where anything then that isn't billable becomes essentially a cost or a distraction or a lack of productivity.
Absolutely right. The discussion was very rare about improving service. It would be about, manipulating. That's a strong word, but it would be about. You're right. How can we charge more minutes? Can we move to a 6-minute measure from a 10-minute measure, or can whatever it was? And I just thought, this is not a way to run a business. It kind of dawned on me, this is not a way. This is not how I would run a business or enjoy running a business. But at that stage of time, I really didn't know what to do. I mean, I really hadn't got the foggiest, and it lasted for a couple of years. I began to seriously think, and I started to ask some clients, some CEOs, some private equity people, and I used to ask them, I think it was a couple of questions. One, what would you do if you ran your own law firm? And secondly, what do you dislike about lawyers? There was lots of responses to the second one. Not a great deal to the first one. And there was that great Henry Ford quote, wasn't there? If we'd have asked the customer, we'd have just had faster horses. So I kind of at that point didn't quite know what to do. And my father, it's about 2 years, and I moved firms in that time because I thought perhaps I'll move firm and it'd be different. And it was always the same. And my father was in a hospice and he had cancer. And he knew I'd been dissatisfied. And I remember we had this one conversation over a couple of afternoons. And he kind of said in the end, he said, look, you've either got to get out of the law or you have to change it. He said, you've got, those are your choices. And I was too old to be a professional footballer at this stage. So I thought, well, perhaps I have to change it. And I started to slowly think about how it could be changed. And that was the driver.
Wow. Your father was, it sounds like he was a great sort of trusted advisor to you over the years. That's what it sounds like to me. Like he was good counsel for you.
He was just a very calm individual who, the other things I always hate in business is people who catastrophize. And I learned from him that the best results are when you don't catastrophize. It's never as good as you think it is, and it's never as bad as you think it is. You just have to be calm and get on with it. And yeah.
So had they just talking of your father and then your mother, had they been? I mean, how were they relating to your kind of career and life trajectory at this point? Were they always kind of cheering you on, or I mean, were they understanding what you were doing?
No, I'm not sure. I think they were just incredibly proud when I became a lawyer. I think they were just really happy about that. I don't think they had any further thoughts beyond that. I think what really developed then is, I don't know about you, Sam. I just became, we're sat in what is my library here. And I just love books and I love reading. And it is interesting. Some people ask me sometimes, how do you describe a good leader? And I always say, first of all, it's a group of characteristics, and those can vary as to when you need them, persistence, drive, vision, all those sorts of things, and they will change at various times. Secondly, it's the ability to take action, not just stand and look at it, actually do action. But the third and probably the most important things, which I do think, in my view, separates people, is the open and growth mindset. The ability, I'm pretty certain, I would hope that I'm a better leader than I was 20 years ago. And that's just through the depth of knowledge, whether it's talking to people like you, Sam, whether it's listening to podcasts, whether it's reading books. It should add to your knowledge. And that's, in my view, I always read about people like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, the volume of stuff that they read, I just find mind blowing. But I can see that. I can see why.
Darryl, you reminded me, I was really struck when I think maybe the first time we met quite a number of years ago, and we were talking about books, and for whatever reason, I mentioned the autobiography of a yogi.
I bought it. It's still. I've got it on your recommendation, and I read it. Great book.
Well, you see that, and I remember at the time just being a little bit amazed because in that kind of engagement. I wouldn't expect that someone would pick up on that and go, "I'm going to get." And then the fact that you then went and bought it and read it. So, and I remember being very struck at the time, going, "That's really interesting." Like Darryl's got this really inquiring, curious, like open mind that wants to, is curious to find out more. I thought that was very striking to me.
Yeah. I think I've always had that, but I think, to be a good leader, you've got to have it. If you close your mindset to things, you've got to have the ability. I mean, there's loads of things about leadership, isn't it? You've got to be able to make decisions, but you need to have the knowledge to make decisions. So I very rarely make a decision without careful thought, listening to people, reading something, and then I'll make a decision.
So your father had that advice, and you said, okay, well, I'm going to need to change it. And just before we get into that, what would you say as you were describing your experience, those kind of couple of years, very uncomfortable years, it sounds to me like there was almost like a sort of an affront to your values that was becoming increasingly hard to live with or to accept, to accommodate. I mean, would you say that's accurate? And what was that affront, would you say? If maybe that's too strong a word, but
Yeah, I think I became very disillusioned. I'm not quite, and I think that could have been the point when I was at a board meeting and thinking this just isn't right. But then I started, and I did really do that to reflect on my past life, and I felt that I'd left behind certain values, which I now try to change now. So this idea of, I felt that, when you're a very fortunate person, you should use it to try and impact society for the better or impact others for the better. And although I think ran quite a nice team and things like that, my influence certainly wasn't beyond that. And when we started the firm, we started our foundation pretty much the week we started the firm. It was almost right at the beginning. And there's lots of things we do now, but it was, I would never want us to be thought of as a greedy law firm that is driven by profits per partner. I really, and we talk about it all the time, about, having a positive impact on society.
And was it you and Sarah from the get-go? Was she the first person you thought of, or did she come to you, or how did that initial spark happen?
It's a very good question. So I ran a group, I remember, at a law firm as Art, which was for general counsel, and I'd got about 25 general counsel in the group, and invited Sarah to join it, and we became quite close to do that. I then, when I started this, as I say, I always need a partner. I always need that support, and there were a number of people that I spoke to, but for various reasons, financial reasons or different reasons at the time, they weren't probably ready to join. And Sarah was. I then spoke to Sarah, and she just left a PLC where she was general counsel. She was doing an MBA, and we met up for a coffee in Audley Edge in Cheshire, Costa Coffee Shop, and we found that we were on the same wavelength. And so, I'd already handed my notice in. I think I was about, I was on a 12 months notice, which I managed to negotiate down to about 9 months. But it was about 4 months into that I met Sarah, and we started to develop the plans.
And the founding elements of the idea, like the model, was that very much from the get go? That was part of the fact, or did the model come in to support the
Yeah.
what you were wanting to create? Which way round did it occur?
It's a good question because I can't remember some of this, Sam. But I think it did evolve, because initially we brought in some partners who were salaried and we paid to join. But I then remember then starting. I was very. I wasn't really. One of the problems with big law firms is that you own, like, no, if you're an equity partner, you own like 0.1% of the business, or 0.01%, but yet you still have a major say in the business. So it can fracture the business. It can make it really difficult to get decisions. So I was very anxious, or very keen, not to just have a vehicle where everyone would have equity in it, because I knew how difficult it would make it be. So I used to talk from day one. I used to say, look, you will have 100% equity in your own business. It will be your business, and you will have 100% equity in that. But we will have the equity that gives you the structure and runs it as you want. And I think it developed from that, from having those conversations, developing. Actually, the way to do it is to bring people in who have 100% equity in their own business, but have no say in the business at the top.
Oh, yeah.
When I say no say,
yeah,
that's slightly unfair to say no say, because we're massive at listening. We are massive at going out listening, but they can't block something that we want to do. Whereas in a traditional firm, you can.
And what was the core driving, statement of intent? Was it, lawyers should be happy, or law should be making a positive impact? Like, what was that sort of core driving? Because there are several aspects that I think make Gunnercooke so disruptive, so unique, and ultimately so successful. But what would you say was that fundamental?
From day one, without a shadow of a doubt, it was about giving freedom to lawyers. That was exactly what it was about. It was that freedom. That has developed, because you said there are quite a lot of firms around now that do what we do. So that freedom is still there, but we now focus a lot more on culture and the impact that we can bring outside it, as well as developing their personal ambition. But definitely the drive on day one was freedom.
Freedom, yeah. And again, I sort of, I don't know a great deal about your world, Darryl. I have worked with law firms, and but my sense is one can't sort of exaggerate in a way how different what you were doing was to the norm at that time. Is that fair?
It's straight. I think it is and it isn't, actually, Sam, because in one ways I always say the only difference is that we remunerate differently. But that has such a knock-on effect in absolutely everything how you live. But that is the only difference. But you're right; it gives you the freedom, so you can take Fridays off. You can take 6 weeks off in summer, but you can work till you're 90. You can pick and choose the clients you want to. You have that ultimate freedom in what you want to do. But it all stems from making that, from that decision of freedom.
Did your father get to see the founding of the business?
No, it's quite sad. Actually, it was really interesting because no, he didn't. So I'd left the law firm I was in. Well, I handed my notice in January. The business didn't start till September. He died in the February. So yeah, that was quite sad. But what was interesting, the very first deal I did, or one of the first deals I did, I was still doing work at the time, and I was working for a business that was being quite a large business that there's a lot of pressure on. They were under pressure. The business was being split up and lots were being sold off. And I used to get in quite early with these clients and talked about what the business was going to do, and at the end of it, I don't know what happened, but I used to say that I loved the finance director's wife bred cockapoos, and I used to say, "Love cockapoos, it's great." And so they gifted me a cockapoo once the transaction was done. It's not usual, is it? That anyway, it was nicknamed, the cockapoo was called Gunner.
Because that was your dad's. That was your dad's.
My dad's nickname was Gunner.
Yeah.
So the cockapoo. But some people think he named the firm after my dog Gunner, but actually it's not. It was named after my father.
That's funny. Why was your dad called Gunner?
I never quite get to the bottom of that, but he was called Big Gunner, and his younger brother was called Little Gunner. I'm never quite sure of it. Actually, it just goes back years.
Yeah, that's amazing. What a lovely tribute to your dad.
My mother's still very proud, and that's nice. That's lovely.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. Well, and then lovely that you've brought your sons in now, and they're now taking the mantle to some extent. Say a little bit more about that, Darryl. Like, what's that been like for you, and what's your experience, and what do you think the experience has been like for them? To be coming in and working with you, for you.
Yeah, it is interesting because there was never any pressure or even expectation that they would come into the business, and I was obviously very concerned that there wouldn't be. But they knew I was going through the thought processes of listing or private equity, and then they had a chat together, and they came to me one day. We'd actually brought a coach in, I think, to talk to us about their future and the future of the business, and they then went away and they had a thought, and they came in and said, "Look, we'd like to come into the business," and it was such a nice way for it to happen because there literally had been no pressure at all. So it was completely driven by them. And then when they came in, I think must be about 9 months ago now. I'm quite hands off in some ways, but I also know that there's a massive experience gap and education gap. So I do give them as much, and they're very bright, very sharp individuals, but I do give them quite a lot of freedom, but I have to, do realize that there's a few years where I just need to help them as much as I can. And how do we do that? So we do work quite hard. We set up a set of courtesy rules between us. So we started very early on as to how we would treat our relationship, so that we would treat each other with respect, and how we talk to each other and things like that. We're concerned that it could get, because we do have disagreements. I mean, they can be very adamant about things that they want to do, and I can be very adamant that we shouldn't do it. So we have to work out how we talk to each other about things and what have you. We worked out a set of courtesy rules in order to do that.
Was there also a wider family conversation before you pulled the trigger on this?
Not particularly. Everyone knew about it. It was there and it was talked about, and I think everyone just thought it was quite exciting. It was a really good, and it certainly took a load off me. I would have hated listing the business, and I wouldn't have enjoyed private equity either. So it took a load off me. It's good for them, I think. I mean, the business has got, it's growing at over 20% a year. So, it's a kind of, and it has been for quite a few years, and it's growing globally. So there's lots of ambitions that they will do. And it links in as well. I mean, Hayden, the youngest one, is kind of very much involved in the business. Ashley, we have a farm in Hereford where we really try to focus on biodiversity and rewilding And Ash's part of his job is to do that as well, and how we link
Hmm.
that into the firm and education, how we educate people
Mm.
within the firm and outside. And Ash is very connected in that rewilding world now. Um, so, it fits a lot of our passions.
Mm.
We kind of connect it to the business.
It just strikes me that it's such a brilliant way to protect, I mean, pun intended, I suppose, but protect the DNA of the business. That it's a business that's founded so fundamentally on this values proposition, if you like, and it's hard to imagine many other options that could have maintained that in the same way that this can.
I think that's. I mean, I'm now a massive advocate. I probably hadn't thought as much before, but of family businesses, because
Mm.
I think it does. James Timpson is a very good friend and
Yeah.
has been at Timpson's and incredibly supportive. And I think it's got a fourth generation family business. But we copy a lot of things that they do. Because it really upholds the values and the culture and just what we're trying to create within the
Mm-hmm.
business. We're in a financial driven model of listing, or private equity doesn't do that. So we're far more concerned about the culture and the values that we create and passing that on. So I
Mm.
do think family businesses are great. I mean, the government doesn't see it the same way. And, it gives us a certain number of headaches
Mm.
in having to deal with that. But um, I think the stability of a family business, and that's what it's given the business as well. I mean, I
Mm.
think a lot of people wondered what was going to happen, what the succession was going to be, and it now gives that stability going forward.
So a kind of sense of relief through the kind of partner and lawyer population in the business.
I get the impression now that there was quite a lot of conversation as to what would happen,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes that, provides that certainty.
Yeah. And Sarah's son joined at the same time or later, before?
Sarah's son joined a few months afterwards in the US office.
Mm-hmm.
So he's based in the US. And that again has been, and actually the three, I shouldn't keep calling them three boys, should I? It sounds a bit patronizing, but the three of them are very close together. They work very hard together. They're very ambitious for the business. They completely understand the culture. And they know I'm going to hang around to protect the culture as well. So at the moment, it works,
Mm.
extremely well.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, really, really beautiful, actually. And then just in terms of the positive impact, just say a little bit about that, Darryl. I know that's, like you say, that was right from the get-go in the founding. A week after you founded, or the same week, you already created the foundation, and then you're doing various good works. I like to refer to it as good works, and you're doing good works as a business. So can you say a little bit about that?
So I always kind of felt that was important, and I think it is interesting that lots of businesses do what's called, CSR, corporate social responsibility. But I think it, as we all know, it became a little bit of a tick box in lots of businesses, I think. And I was concerned that we didn't create something like that, but we did something with real meaning. So from day one, we set up one particular part of the business, which we call Inspire, which is about enhancing the effectiveness of chief executives of charities, and it's for smaller charities. And it grows and develops them, and they're put into groups of 10 or 12, and then we find a facilitator, and we give them lots of skills to help them to do it. That's got something like 180 charities within that. Some of those charities will work with in different ways, just in, as I say, making them more effective and developing them. Some of them will help them. They might want to create another product called BFG, where they look off their assets to creating profit that they can put back in the business, and we work with them to help to do that. It then led on to other things that we felt. One of the things that came out of it was we're very concerned that underprivileged children or disadvantaged children were not getting the opportunities that we'd often get rung up by the chief executive of a business who would say, can my son or daughter come and do an internship membership with you? And of course, we'd always want to say yes, but then we put a 1+1 together and say yes, but at the same time, we will find a disadvantaged child and we'll give them exactly the same opportunity. That's developing now. That's developing now into growing into what we call GC Scholars, and we're developing it into what we'll call the University of Opportunity, where it'll grow large, it'll grow bigger. It's focusing on care, children in care, very much. But then we had this thing as well where we said, look, we're doing a lot of these things for these other charities, but what is our difference? What we want to do? And it was during the pandemic, and I was reading a lot about isolation and loneliness, and it's kind of, I don't want to throw statistics around that are unfair, but it is probably a bigger killer than obesity. If you are socially isolated or lonely, you are far more likely to die of cancer or of any illness than if you're not socially isolated or if you have support around you. So it does have a massive impact. So we said, well, what can we do about it? And we wanted to get a physical presence in order to do something. So we opened this, which is a phenomenal bookshop. You must go to it if you're ever in Manchester. In Manchester, in a prime part of Manchester. It's a listed building there. Churchill and Lord George used to go in there and debate. It's the most beautiful place. There's a coffee shop in there. A lot of booksellers in there, chatty tables. It's a really buzzy place, and it's really developed to try to fight social isolation. We've now made a commitment that we're going to open one in every city from which we operate, and we're in 16 cities. So we're now working out that we're going to open them in different cities. And then from that as well, we thought, well, actually, how do we take it out to communities? So we've now developed the concept of the bus of Book and Friends, where the aim is to take double-decker buses, reconfigure them, put a coffee shop in there and a bookshop in there, and take them out into different areas and try and connect communities. So we're now about to start a crowdfunding exercise that will help us to do that. So we'll run bookshops and we'll run buses to go out to different places. And the whole idea is about connection, about social isolation, loneliness, and connecting people.
Darryl, it's just so beautiful and so moving to hear you describe that. And in some ways, I just see this beautiful arc from that original sense that you had very early on of, I'm here to help and serve. And that's a big motivator for me. And then what you're now able to do and what you are doing, and that this is something that, one can very easily imagine expanding, like the scale that you can start to impact at is extraordinary. So it's a beautiful arc, that I think, that through line to help and serve, to do the good.
But I don't know about you, Sam, and I mean, the world we're living in is just such a mess, isn't it? And I love one of the phrases that I do use in business all the time is, if you think war, you get war. But if you think peace, you'll get peace. So I always think that we should be thinking about the really good things that we're trying to do. And some people could say, well, you're not being realistic because there's always bad times. I think I am being incredibly realistic. I do not shy away from problems and issues, but I think the way out of it is to think of the positive and to think of the good things. And then that's the way to get out of things. So I wish we could get that across to some of our leaders at the moment. But I think focusing on that positive has got to be the right way forward.
Darryl, that's just a really beautiful place to draw this conversation to a close. And even though we could say lots more about that, but I think that's profound and kind of a perfect place to conclude. Thanks so much, Darryl. I really, really appreciate you giving your time for this. It's been a really nice conversation. I hope we can get together at some point.
I would love that, but I really do genuinely thank you for giving up your time to do that. So that's really appreciated. So thank you, and it would be lovely to get together. Let's do that.
Thanks, Darryl.